A deadly toast, a missing ring, and secrets buried in ivy. Welcome to Shadow Files. I am your host, Cole. This community is amazing. Comment where you're listening from. Your words keep this journey alive. Let's begin the mystery. The storm had rolled in without warning, a sweep of black clouds smothering the Oxford skyline and cloaking the ancient spires in shadow. Inside the venerable Ivy Tower College, the storm was scarcely noticed. The dining hall gleamed with candlelight and silver, filled with the laughter of scholars and patrons gathered for the annual Founders' Banquet. Portraits of long-dead dons glared down from oak-panelled walls, as though resentful that the living dared enjoy themselves beneath their solemn gaze. At the high table sat Lord Henry Vale, benefactor of the college and owner of an intellect as sharp as it was unkind. Beside him, professors, fellows, and a scattering of guests conversed in carefully measured tones, their conversations layered with politeness and veiled rivalry. For in Ivy Tower, prestige was everything, and a single whispered scandal could ruin a career. As the final toast was raised and the great clock struck 11, Lord Vale rose, glass in hand. His voice, smooth yet edged with arrogance, cut through the hall, to tradition, to truth, and to those who guard it. The words were followed by the thunder's crash outside. A moment later, the lights flickered. Gasps rose, the chandeliers dimmed, and then, sudden and chilling, came a cry. When the candles steadied, Lord Vale was slumped forward, his glass spilled, a crimson stain spreading across the snowy tablecloth. The hall erupted in confusion. Some cried for a doctor, others for the police, but one thing was unmistakable. Lord Henry Vale was dead, and yet, though poison seemed the obvious culprit, his expression was strangely calm, almost thoughtful, as if death had whispered something to him that no one else could hear. Already, eyes darted across the hall. Who among the cloistered world of dons, scholars, and guests had wished Vale dead? That, of course, would be the question to trouble the minds of many. But one mind, more precise, more relentless, would trouble itself rather differently. For in the days to come, Monsieur Hercule Poirot, the little Belgian with the egg-shaped head and mustaches of perfect symmetry, would find himself summoned to Ivy Tower. And it was he alone who would untangle the lies, rivalries, and jealousies hidden within its ivy-clad walls. For a few heartbeats, nobody moved. The storm growled over the roof. A draught found its way beneath the doors and set the candle flames to a faint shiver, as if the light itself had taken fright. Then chairs scraped, a woman gave a strangled cry, and the master of Ivy Tower, Dr. Alistair Finch, pushed back from the high table with an authority born of old routines, prize-givings, grant announcements, disciplinary hearings, and not at all of death. "Please, remain seated," he said, voice steady. "No one is to leave." He glanced at the college physician, a stooped man with quick fingers and a face lined by decades of discreet diagnoses. Dr. Edmund Lacey bent over Lord Vale, touched the throat, lifted an eyelid, peered at the upturned glass. The hall quieted itself to that muffled silence peculiar to public calamity. Lacey's hand hesitated a fraction over the wine, then he drew a small linen handkerchief from his pocket and covered the rim of the glass with excessive care. "He is gone," he said at last. "No wound." It was very swift. "Poison?" asked someone too loudly. Lacey did not answer. He looked instead at the white tablecloth with its spreading splotch, at the way the stain feathered unevenly, darker at the edges. His eyes shifted, once, to the candlestick nearest Lord Vale's place. The wax there was spattered in the same small constellation as the wine. Very gently, he folded Lord Vale's right hand, not the left, across his breast, and in doing so, he frowned, as if he had reached out in the dark for a familiar object and found it missing. Dr. Finch clapped for attention. The doors will be shut. Mr. Flint, if you please, the bursar, Marcus Flint, a thick-set man whose careful boredom had made donors feel both safe and managed for years, hustled to the doors and spoke to the porters. Keys turned. The storm obligingly hammered its agreement upon the windows. The company breathed again, and with breath came sensation, the cloying fragrance of the floral centerpieces, the high note of polish on old oak, the metallic tang of fear. Eyes traveled as eyes will. Lady Agatha Rowland, pale and commanding beneath a hat that made a polite spectacle of itself, sat very straight, hands folded, watching nobody, and therefore everybody. Professor Lionel Archer, the celebrated classicist whose lectures were standing room only, examined the little brown mole on the back of his left hand with such attention one might have mistaken it for a rare manuscript. Dr. Beatrice Hart, chemistry fellow, wore a composure that was almost an idea rather than a feeling. Her features were set with the exactness of a formula correctly balanced. The chaplain, Reverend Dr. Julian Pritchard, had bowed his head. Whether in prayer or calculation, no one could have said. Closer to the head of the table, a young woman's knuckles had whitened about her napkin. Evelyn Vale, Lord Vale's niece and ward, was a beauty of the sort that never sits easily in a hall built for men. The mirror-like gaze of the portraits seemed to object to her existence. Beside her sat Sebastian Crowe, a junior fellow whose eager intelligence had been praised more than once in the college's newsletters, and whose jaw was now clenched too tight for the comfort of his neighbors. At the far end, the archivist, Dr. Phoebe Kent, small and precise, stared at the closed doors with the expression of a cat shut out of a room where something fragile might be knocked from a shelf. "Ladies and gentlemen," Dr. Finch said, with the rebuking calm of a headmaster who expects to be obeyed, "the police have been sent for. Until they arrive, we will adjourn to the senior common room. The high table and the immediate guests will remain together. Those seated below the salt will proceed to the junior common room. No one is to remove anything from the hall." This last was as much an admonition as an instruction. Mrs. Ada Larkins, the housekeeper, had already signaled to the porters with a series of tiny movements. No plates lifted, no glasses gathered, not a crumb disturbed. She was a woman whose kind eyes had seen more than they ever told, and whose sense of order had kept the college from dissolving into a chaos of lost teaspoons and misplaced keys. Now that order reasserted itself like a rug pulled firm beneath an uneven table. In the senior common room, the fire had been kept up, and its faithful glow took some of the chill from the air. Books lined the walls in two pleasing colors: green for things one could quote without looking, red for the rest. The portraits here were less censorious, more gossipy, as though the painted dons might lean down and offer opinions if the living failed them. Coffee was suggested and declined. The storm rumbled on, determined to keep everyone inside. The master took a position near the mantel and pretended to warm his hands. In truth, he was studying faces. Dr. Lacey stood by the window, watching the court, his reflection a thin ghost in the glass. He spoke quietly to Finch. "If it is what I suspect, it will not be the kitchen's doing." "You suspect a particular agent?" Finch asked, equally quietly. "I suspect intention," Lacey replied, and they let that sentence hang in the room where people were trying not to hear it. Inspector Harold Graves arrived with 2 constables, rein on his coat and a manner like a bulldog determined to be just. He took in the assembled company, nodded to the master, and then did the simple, necessary thing. "Names," he said. "Alibis later. For now, your names." They went round, and with each name there seemed to come a faint aroma of motive, as if the syllables themselves exhaled secrets. Professor Lionel Archer, whose latest book, an audacious rereading of a set of Roman inscriptions, had been publicly savaged by Lord Vale in a lecture last Michaelmas. Mistaken brilliance, Vale had called it, and Archer, for all his sardonic aplomb, had carried that phrase around like a small stone in his shoe ever since. Dr. Beatrice Hart, whose research on alkaloids had been the pride of the department until a funding review last term reduced her laboratory to a skeleton crew. The decision had been influenced, the college rumors said, by a donor's desire to see money diverted to an architectural folly that would bear his name. The donor had been Lord Vale. For a woman who believed in elegance expressed as exactitude, waste must have felt like an offence as keen as insult. Lady Agatha Rowland, rival patron and occasional ally to the college, who had intended to endow a women's fellowship with conditions that offended Lord Vale's sense of hierarchy. "Merit strangled by quota," he had said to her face, and she had smiled as one smiles at a child who prefers mud to music. Marcus Flint, the bursar, protector of ledgers and whisperer to treasuries. He had been seen in heated discussion with Vale that very afternoon. The new rowing pavilion had gone over budget. The accounts, it was murmured, had needed a degree of creativity. Creativity in finances is a vice admired without being forgiven. Reverend Dr. Pritchard, who had opposed Lord Vale's plan to sell a set of medieval choir stalls to a private collector, calling it an act of sacrilege against the continuity of worship, Vale had replied pleasantly that continuity was exactly what money bought. Dr. Phoebe Kent, keeper of manuscripts, whose life's work was the care of the very things men like Vale liked to own. For weeks there had been talk, in corridors and in the breathless space between "Good morning" and "I must dash," that a particular manuscript, thought to be a gem of the college's collection, contained inconsistencies which Dr. Kent had begged the master to allow her to study quietly before any announcement. Lord Vale had teased, publicly and repeatedly, that he would unveil the jewel in our crown at the banquet. Sebastian Crowe, the prodigy who wrote with a facility that irritated his elders because it left them no polite way to disapprove. Only last week, a senior external examiner had raised a question about an article of his in an American journal, and it was whispered that Lord Vale had obtained letters which would make Crowe's brilliant edifice appear, if not stolen, then built upon foundations unusually well swept of attribution. Evelyn Vale, who smiled in photographs beside her uncle, and did not, in ordinary hours, smile at all. The terms of Lord Vale's will were a subject of safe speculation at certain garden parties. His niece's impending engagement to a scholar of precarious standing had not been the sort of alliance the older man rejoiced in. It was said that he loved her as a man loves his own taste reflected back at him, possessively and with a tendency to rearrange. Mrs. Larkins, who knew which fellow drank more than he admitted, and which undergraduate was afraid of the dark. She had observed place cards moved on the high table that afternoon, or so the kitchen boy had told the scullery maid, who had told the laundry girl, who had told the porter's daughter, who had told nobody, because porters' daughters know better. Mrs. Larkins herself would tell the truth, but only to the right pair of ears. Inspector Graves, having taken names, asked for the sequence of events, the toast, the flicker of lights, the cry. "Did anyone observe Lord Vale before the toast in a manner that struck you?" he said. It was the question of a man who knew that murder is often preceded by dinner. Only that he was pleased with himself, Archer said dryly, a state he mistook for virtue. "He sent me a note," Dr. Kent said, surprising herself by speaking. An hour before the banquet, he wrote, "You will be vindicated, Doctor. Tonight we crown the truth." "We crown the truth," Graves repeated. Odd phrase. It was like him, Lady Agatha observed. His metaphors always wore jewels. "Who poured for the high table?" Graves asked, businesslike again. "The footman under Mr. Partridge," said Mrs. Larkins, materializing with the inevitability of a conscience. The port was decanted in the butler's pantry in my presence. The wine service began at the lower end and proceeded upward. Lord Vale's glass was filled last, just before the toast. Was anything brought to the table after the first service? Graves said. A second dish of syllabub, Marcus Flint put in, at Lord Vale's insistence. He had a fondness for sugared things. Which he tasted, said Graves. He ignored it, said Beatrice Hart, with the faintest crease in her otherwise disciplined brow. He had been talking all evening of what he would unveil. He loved to dangle keys and not open doors Evelyn Vale had not spoken. Now she looked up, eyes dry and fever-bright. He changed his speech at the last moment, she said. He told me so, 5 minutes before the meal. He said some people would not sleep well tonight, but that the college would be safe. Safe from what, Miss Vale? Graves asked. From thieves, she said, and her gaze, entirely without malice, glanced past Dr. Kent to Reverend Pritchard, and then, almost absently, to Sebastian Crowe, as if the word itself were a pebble skimmed across a surface to see where the ripples reached. Graves considered this without expression. We will return to the hall, he said. No one is to touch the head table. Mr. Flint, you and the master will accompany me. Dr. Lacey, I will need your written observation. The rest of you will kindly stay here. They filed back in 2s and 3s, the inspector, the master, the bursar, the physician. The candles had burned lower. The stain on the cloth had deepened to a dull garnet, a color that made one think not of blood, but of an old velvet curtain pulled over a window. Graves went at once to Lord Vale's place. He did not hover. He looked with the impartiality of a man who has stood too often at the edge of other people's endings to romanticize them. His glass, he said. Lacey lifted the handkerchief. The rim bore a smudge, not the clean oval of a lip, but a small crescent low on the glass, as if touched against by something curved and cool. Graves lifted the candlestick and held it in the air so that the wax lips cast a fat shadow on the cloth. Splash, he murmured, and the wax spattered too. A draught at the moment of the toast, suggested Finch, anxious to have the world behave. Perhaps, said Graves, with the non-committal politeness of a man who has heard many draughts blamed for many deaths. He leaned closer to Lord Vale's right hand, then to his left. He wore a signet ring? Yes, Finch said. Always. The Vale crest. He liked to leave impressions. It is not here, Graves said calmly. Finch blinked. Not? No. He never removed it. And yet, Graves said, and his eyes were not on the finger, but on the linen beside it, where a faint oval impression, imperfect and slightly smeared, marred the cloth as if a ring, removed hurriedly, had been set down, then snatched up again by a hand unsure of its decision. They stood silent. Then Graves looked past the table to the dais, to the lectern where Vale had stood to speak. A paper lay there, looped by ribbon. Graves touched it. The ribbon had been tied in a meticulous bow, the kind a man ties once in the morning and never again that day. He untied it, glanced at the first lines, and his mouth tightened. This is not a speech, he said. It is a list. A list? Finch echoed. Names, said Graves. Not of the living. Of benefactors, lineage, dates of acquisition, provenance notes, and here, one word repeated more than once in the margin. Guardianship. Dr. Kent's breath caught. The charter, she said softly. He meant to speak of the charter that governs the custody of our manuscripts. He wanted to change the terms, publicly perhaps, to grant himself authority as guardian, in fact, if not in law, and thereby to sell what he pleased. Reverend Pritchard said bitterly from the doorway, where he had appeared without asking leave, his clerical collar accusatory in the candlelight. Or to stop a sale others had planned, Lady Agatha said, her tone so mild it was difficult to be sure she did not mean herself. Graves folded the paper again, replaced the ribbon with a neatness that matched the original. We are not here to adjudicate generosity, he said. We are here to discover who found it necessary that Lord Vale say none of these things. A door opened somewhere along the hall. The wind reached in and plucked at the chandeliers, and the little flames ducked obediently as though to avoid a blow. Graves looked up. "The storm will keep us," he said. "No one will leave tonight. I want statements." Each in turn, his gaze moved across the faces, unhurried, exact. "I shall start," he added, almost conversationally, "with those whose work makes them pay attention to details that other people overlook." Beatrice Hart smiled the sort of smile that is a barricade. Dr. Kent tightened her lips upon an argument she would not be bullied into losing. Marcus Flint allowed his eyelids to droop in a way that had soothed angry donors and would not soothe a policeman. Lionel Archer examined his mole again, and this time it seemed less interesting. From the hearth, the master saw what the inspector had seen, and what he had chosen not to say, that grief was not visible here in any of its honest forms. There was shock, there was outrage, there was the private arithmetic of opportunity and loss, but grief had not been invited to the banquet. Somewhere beyond the college gates, a motor arrived, its lights dragging two pale bars across the black puddles of the court. The porter, who had been standing in the arch like a lighthouse with a keyring, hurried out with an umbrella. A small figure stepped from the car with care, first setting one polished shoe upon the cobbles, and then, with equal deliberation, the other. The umbrella tilted, and beneath it appeared an egg-shaped head, a very fine mustache, and a hat removed as if the rain itself deserved a bow. In the senior common room a murmur rose, not of fear this time, but of attention arranged, like chairs brought forward for a lecture. Inspector Graves, who was not easily impressed, straightened almost imperceptibly. Dr. Finch allowed himself, for the first time that evening, to exhale. The newcomer stood in the doorway and, without ceremony, attended to the arrangement of a small vase of wilting Michaelmas daisies on the sideboard. He turned one stem so that its face was to the room rather than the wall. Then he looked up, and his eyes, very green when the light caught them, very grey when it did not, took in the company in a single sweep that felt like the smooth, careful turn of a key in a well-oiled lock. "Messieurs, mesdames," said Hercule Poirot, and the storm obligingly softened to hear him. "I am here because order has been offended. We will restore it, n'est-ce pas?" He smiled, not at anyone in particular, but as though the truth itself were a guest who had arrived a little late and must be made comfortable before she spoke. The moment Hercule Poirot entered, the atmosphere altered as if someone had shifted a mirror to show the company their own faces more plainly. He was not imposing in stature, but he radiated an order that made men check their collars and women their gloves. His presence was like the arrangement of cutlery at a perfect table setting, modest in itself, yet any disorder beside it became instantly intolerable. Poirot inclined his head to Inspector Graves with courtesy. "You are already at work, mon cher inspecteur. Permit that I assist. These old walls, they have seen many jealousies, many ambitions, eh? To me, such places, they are like hot houses where rare plants grow, and sometimes the poison flower blooms most vigorously." Graves, who prided himself on bluntness, almost bristled at the metaphor, but Poirot's calm precision disarmed even bulldogs. "I won't turn down help," he said. "But understand, this is a police matter." "Mais naturellement," Poirot replied, seating himself with extraordinary neatness at a small table. "You will command, I will observe. And perhaps I will notice the one petal out of place." The master, Finch, visibly relaxed. The others did not. For though Graves was authority, he was also familiar. A policeman could be evaded or withstood. Poirot was something else, something they could not predict. He began not with questions, but with silence. He smoothed the crease of his cuff, adjusted the angle of a candle until its flame no longer quivered, and looked gently around the room. The silence pressed upon them like the storm pressing at the windows. People fidgeted. Archer cleared his throat. Crow shifted in his chair. Evelyn Vale studied the hearth as though afraid its fire might die without her vigilance. At last, Poirot spoke. "Perhaps you will indulge me. Each of you were in the hall when Lord Vale lifted his glass?" "We? Good. Now tell me, what did you feel when he spoke his toast?" It was an odd question. They expected to be asked what they saw, not what they felt. Yet one by one, as though compelled, they answered. Professor Archer's tone was sardonic. "I felt, Monsieur Poirot, what I always feel when Lord Vale spoke, irritation. He believed truth was whatever came most handsomely out of his own mouth." Lady Agatha raised her chin. "I felt nothing. Lord Vale and I disagreed, yes, but I do not waste emotion on pompous speeches." Beatrice Hart's reply was cool. "I felt anticipation. He had hinted at some revelation concerning the college. I'm a scientist. I respect discoveries. However disagreeable the discoverer, the Reverend Pritchard's voice was solemn. I felt unease. He spoke of guardianship, yet I knew his guardianship would not be of the spirit, but of property." Evelyn Vale's hands twisted in her lap. "I felt fear. He told me beforehand that some people would not sleep well that night." Sebastian Crow hesitated, then said, "I felt surprise. He seemed almost jovial. I had expected something darker." Marcus Flint coughed. "I felt relief that it was nearly over. These banquets are tedious affairs." Phoebe Kent clasped her hands. "I felt confusion. I had received his note about vindication, and I wondered if the toast was part of it." Poirot nodded gently to each, like a man noting the order of cards in a deck. Then he smiled faintly. "You see, my friends, already we have an array of sentiments, all toward one man, and none of them love. In such soil, the seed of murder may sprout," Inspector Graves cut in. "We'll keep this simple. Means, motive, opportunity. I'll take them in turn. Dr. Lacey, was it poison?" The physician adjusted his spectacles. "Almost certainly." The suddenness, the calm expression, the lack of struggle. It suggests a cardiac agent. A swift alkaloid, perhaps. But the examination must be thorough. It could have been introduced in the wine. "Could," Graves repeated. "Could. Or in something he touched or inhaled. Some poisons are subtle, Inspector. They need only a trace." Poirot's mustaches twitched. "Ah, but to deliver that trace at precisely the right moment, that requires subtlety also. One does not scatter poison like confetti at a wedding." "Non, it is placed with intention." Graves gestured to the group. Opportunity then. The wine was poured openly. "Anyone nearer the high table?" Mrs. Larkins, the housekeeper, answered from the doorway where she lingered. "The glasses were poured by the footman." None of these touched it. "Then the syllabub," Graves pressed. "Brought from the kitchen," said Flint. Hart interjected coolly, "If it were the syllabub, all who tasted would be ill." Unless his portion alone was treated, Graves frowned. And could it have been? "It could," she admitted. Poirot leaned forward. "Pardon, madame, you are expert in alkaloids. Tell me, which of your colleagues in this room would know the precise agent?" Hart met his gaze without blinking. "None, Monsieur Poirot. My discipline is not the dinner conversation of the common room." Poirot inclined his head but said no more. His question had left its ripple. Graves resumed. "So, means uncertain. But motive, that's plain. Half of you had quarrelled with Vale." At this, Lionel Archer gave a short laugh. "Half?" "No, Inspector. All. Even you would have disliked him had you met him sooner." Poirot smiled faintly. "It is true, perhaps. But dislike is not murder. It is the intensity of the motive, its urgency that matters. Let us consider," he turned first to Lady Agatha. "You, madame, wished for a fellowship for women. He opposed you. You are a woman of will. But is this sufficient to kill?" She looked down her nose at him. I prefer battles of policy, Monsieur Poirot. Not poison Poirot, next regarded Archer. And you, monsieur, with your reputation so wounded? Archer shrugged. I write another book. Reputation can be mended. Murder cannot. Poirot's gaze shifted to heart. And you, mademoiselle, whose laboratory lies desolate while the donors fund bricks and mortar? Her reply was measured. I resent wasted potential, yes. But poison is an inelegant solution. To Marcus Flint, he asked, you had a quarrel this very afternoon, did you not? Flint pursed his lips. Disagreements are the business of a bursar. But the college cannot function without money, and murder is ruinously expensive in reputation. Phoebe Kent trembled slightly when Poirot addressed her. And you, Dr. Kent, you feared the unveiling of the manuscript? She swallowed. I only wanted to delay. To study it properly, not to stop it forever. Poirot's eyes softened. And you, Mademoiselle Vale? Evelyn's lips parted. For a moment she seemed about to deny, then she whispered, he controlled everything. My life, my choices. He promised to ruin Sebastian. If I defied him, a hush followed. Sebastian Crow put a protective hand over hers. Poirot observed it, then looked at Crow. And you, monsieur? You feared exposure of some academic indiscretion? Crow flushed. An exaggeration. Vale threatened me, yes, but he exaggerated everything. He enjoyed seeing others squirm. Poirot tapped a finger against his chin. So, each of you had cause, and yet none admits to passion enough to kill. Curious, Inspector Graves growled. They'll admit it before I'm done. But Poirot only smiled. Perhaps. Or perhaps the truth hides in a detail so small we have not yet looked for it. The rain beat harder against the windows. Within, tension rose like steam. Each suspect avoided the other's eyes. Poirot turned suddenly to Dr. Lacey. Tell me, doctor, you examined his hands. You noticed the missing ring? Yes, Lacey said. His signet was gone. Poirot steepled his fingers. A curious theft. To kill a man and at once take his ring, it is not impulse. It is either symbolism or necessity. Which, I wonder? The Reverend Pritchard interjected. The ring bore the Vale crest. Perhaps it was hatred, a desire to despoil him even in death. Perhaps, Poirot murmured. Or perhaps the ring itself holds a secret. The company shifted uneasily. Poirot let them. He had sown a seed. Inspector Graves rose. Enough for tonight. Statements will be taken individually. No one leaves the college until morning. The suspects filed into smaller chambers to write accounts. Poirot remained by the hearth, eyes half closed, listening to the scribble of pens and the murmur of voices. At length, he said softly to Graves, Do you see, mon ami, how they spoke of their feelings? Not one spoke of sorrow. That is the most damning silence of all. Graves grunted. They'll show sorrow when they hang. Poirot shook his head. Non, they will show fear when they lie, and that, I think, we shall see very soon. The hour grew late. The storm battered the tower as if eager to tear away its ivy, to expose the secrets clinging there. In the senior common room, Hercule Poirot straightened a candlestick, smoothed an invisible crease upon the tablecloth, and whispered to himself, The order has been disturbed. But order, it always returns. And when it does, it brings with it the truth. And with that quiet promise, the night pressed on, holding its company captive, while the little Belgian prepared to unravel the threads of deception one by one. The night at Ivy Tower deepened, the storm outside playing its relentless symphony of wind and rain. The old stone walls seemed to hold their breath, the ivy shivering against the windows like conspirators whispering secrets. Inside, the senior common room was thick with unspoken things. Each of the assembled suspects had now given their statements, though Inspector Graves insisted more detail would be demanded in the morning. Yet already It was clear. Contradictions lurked in their words, tiny cracks in the smooth facades of academic composure. Poirot sat quietly by the fire, his hands placed with geometrical precision upon his knees. To the casual observer, he looked half asleep, but in truth his mind was as alert as the storm itself. He listened, not to words now, but to silences. Silences, he often said, reveal more than speeches. When the last of the statements had been collected, Graves approached him, rubbing the back of his thick neck. "It's a nest of snakes, Poirot. Every one of them had a quarrel with the man, and every one of them swears they didn't touch a thing." Poirot opened one eye. "Mon cher, you look only for the hand that pours the poison. I look for the heart that planned the gesture. The one reveals itself through haste, the other through vanity." Graves frowned. "Vanity?" Poirot smiled faintly. "Oui, a murder such as this, in the full glare of a banquet, it is not the act of a coward wishing to escape notice. Non. It is the act of a person who desires the performance, the theatre. Lord Vale must die publicly, at the moment of triumph. That tells us something important about our murderer. He or she was not content with merely ending a life. They wanted a spectacle." Graves muttered something about foreigners and philosophy, but he did not argue further. He had, despite himself, a grudging respect for Poirot's uncanny eye. Meanwhile, the suspects had been permitted to disperse into assigned chambers under guard of the porters. None was permitted to leave the college grounds. The gates were locked, and the storm made any escape unthinkable. Poirot insisted, however, that before they retired, he be allowed to speak to each in turn, not formally, but conversationally. Graves agreed, though reluctantly. The first he chose was Dr. Beatrice Hart, the chemist. She was summoned back into the common room, her dark eyes sharp as scalpels. "Mademoiselle," Poirot began softly, "you are a woman who thinks in formulae, n'est-ce pas? Balance, structure, precision. Tell me, what would you say of a crime committed with such disorder as this?" Hart regarded him coolly. "It is disorder only to the untrained eye. To me, it has the pattern of deliberate choice. A rapid alkaloid, yes, but one that leaves little trace. Elegant, if one must be forced to describe it so. Whoever used it had knowledge, Poirot echoed. And opportunity. Yet you deny the one and the other. Curious, you think because I know poisons, I must have chosen one," she snapped. "That is a childish logic, Monsieur Poirot. Shall we accuse the carpenter because the crime involved wood, or the mathematician because the murderer could count?" Poirot only inclined his head. "Just so. And yet the murderer, whoever he is, must count on such reasoning to protect him. A convenient misdirection, eh?" Her lips thinned, but she said nothing. Further, Poirot dismissed her with a polite nod. Next came Lionel Archer, the classicist, his long frame folded into a chair with habitual disdain. He twirled a pen he had borrowed from the writing desk, his mind already rehearsing clever rejoinders. "Monsieur," Poirot said, "your quarrel with Lord Vale. It was personal." Archer snorted. "Vale had no interest in scholarship except as a weapon. He savaged my book because it amused him to see me humiliated. But what of it? Scholars live on criticism. It keeps the blood circulating. And yet," Poirot said gently, "your colleagues say you were bitter." "Bitter? Perhaps. But bitterness alone does not make a man pour poison in a glass. I wield words, not potions. Besides," and here he leaned forward, eyes flashing, "Vale's death robs me of revenge. Dead men cannot be mocked." Poirot studied him carefully. There was passion here, but of a theatrical sort, almost rehearsed. He noted it and allowed Archer to retreat. Lady Agatha Rowland followed. Her presence was commanding, her every movement deliberate. Poirot bowed slightly, for courtesy demanded it. "Madame, you are a woman of influence," he said. "A fellowship for women. Such a cause is close to your heart." And Lord Vale stood against it. Her smile was faint. "I am accustomed to men standing against me, Monsieur Poirot. They usually fall of their own weight." "Then you had no desire to hasten his fall?" "Desire, perhaps, but not action. My weapons are money and influence, not poison." Poirot's eyes twinkled. "Ah, but poison. It is sometimes the weapon of influence too, no? It removes an obstacle most decisively." Lady Agatha's gaze sharpened. "I see what you do, Monsieur Poirot. You prod, you provoke." "But I am not so easily unsettled." Poirot inclined his head once more. "I observe only, Madame." The truth will reveal itself in time. Sebastian Crowe entered next, young, ambitious, his jaw tight with indignation. Evelyn Vale hovered outside, protesting she should accompany him, but Poirot insisted on speaking to each separately. "Monsieur Crowe," Poirot began, "you are a man whose career lies before him. Yet Lord Vale held letters that could damage you." Crowe's fists clenched. It was an exaggeration. "I had drawn upon a foreign source, without proper attribution, perhaps. But it was no theft. Vale meant to destroy me simply to exercise his power." "And that frightened you?" Poirot asked quietly. "It infuriated me," Crowe burst out. "To think my work, years of it, could be ruined by his whim. Yes, I hated him, but hate is not enough, is it? I'm not a coward who slips poison into a glass." Poirot's gaze rested on him a moment longer, then he nodded. "You defend yourself hotly, monsieur." "Almost too hotly, perhaps." Crowe scowled but said nothing more. At last, Poirot called Evelyn Vale herself. She entered with reluctance, pale but resolute. Poirot rose courteously as she sat. "Mademoiselle, your uncle. He controlled your life, did he not?" Her voice trembled. "He dictated everything, where I might live, whom I might see, even whom I might marry. He despised Sebastian. He said he would disinherit me, cast me aside if I defied him." Poirot leaned forward gently. "And so, you felt relief when he died?" Her eyes widened, tears brimming. "I felt freedom. For the first time. Does that make me guilty?" Poirot's voice softened. "None, mademoiselle. It makes you human, but freedom can tempt one to act rashly." "Did you act so?" She shook her head fiercely. "No. I wished him gone, but I could never. Poirot regarded her in silence. She was sincere, or very skilled in appearing so. He would not yet decide. The night wore on, each conversation weaving another thread into Poirot's tapestry of suspicion. At last, all suspects had been seen, and Poirot returned to the hearth, his mind working furiously. Inspector Graves approached again. "Well, what do you make of them?" Poirot smiled thinly. "They are like the ivy itself, mon ami. To the eye it is all leaves and stems, but beneath each tendril clings with fierce purpose. Each twists around its neighbor. To pull one away, you must see where it begins, not where it ends." Graves muttered. "That's all very poetic, but I need a name." "Patience," Poirot said softly. "The name will come. But first, there is something we must discover. Not who placed the poison, but why Lord Vale's ring was taken. That, I think, is the key." As the storm beat on, Poirot resolved that in the morning he would examine the hall again, every candle, every goblet, every inch of the tablecloth. Somewhere in the disorder, a small thing would reveal itself, and once it did, the careful order of his little grey cells would expose the murderer for all to see. But for now, Ivy Tower slept uneasily, its residents restless in their chambers, each wondering how much Poirot had already guessed. And in the silence of the storm, the truth waited, patient like a shadow in the ivy. The morning broke reluctantly over Ivy Tower, as though the sun itself hesitated to peer into the ancient court after the night's violence. Rain still dripped from the gargoyles, and mist clung to the grass, muffling the sound of footsteps. The ivy upon the stone walls glistened with silver beads of water, their beauty masking the clinging tenacity beneath. Inside, the atmosphere was no less damp. Fatigue and unease hung upon every corridor like mildew. Poirot, however, emerged from his chamber immaculate, his moustaches waxed to perfection, his shoes polished to a mirror. He greeted the porter as though nothing in the night had been extraordinary, and walked with delicate precision to the dining hall where Lord Vale had met his death. Inspector Graves was already there, his hair damp, his boots leaving faint prints on the flagged stones. "You're up early, Poirot," Graves remarked, though he looked as though he had slept no more than a handful of minutes. Poirot spread his hands. "Order, mon ami. It waits for no man. One must be up before chaos decides to rise also." The hall was as it had been left, the long table undisturbed, the crimson stain on the cloth darker now, as if time itself conspired to deepen it. The goblets still gleamed in the pale light, and the great portraits loomed silently. Poirot moved among them as though walking through a crime museum. "See, Inspector," Poirot said softly, bending over Lord Vale's chair. "Here is the theatre of our tragedy. But the stage is not random. It is arranged as carefully as a set designer arranges a scene. One detail, so small, so insignificant to others, will tell us what we need." Graves huffed. "I've looked. There's nothing out of place except the man himself being dead." "Non, non," Poirot corrected, lifting a candlestick delicately. "Look again at the wax. See how it spattered outward at the very moment the wine fell? It tells us there was movement, sudden, perhaps deliberate, beside the glass. And yet no one noticed. Graves leaned in, grudging. Could be just the draught." Lamps flickered at the same time. Poirot shook his head. "A draught may disturb a flame. But to splash wine, Inspector, that requires a hand which perhaps slipped something into the glass. The wax was struck because the glass was moved, clumsily or in haste." Voila, Graves scratched his chin. "So you think someone leaned in at the toast, made the drop then?" Poirot tapped his temple. "Precisely." The toast gave cover. Everyone lifted their glass, eyes on Lord Vale. In such a moment, a single second of clumsiness would escape notice. They studied the table a while longer. Poirot's eyes moved next to the linen where the faint oval impression of the missing ring lingered. He stooped closer, his breath barely disturbing the fabric. "Here, Inspector, here lies the greater mystery. Why remove the ring? Poisoning is one act, theft is another. To combine them suggests intention far beyond simple revenge," Graves grumbled. "Maybe a robbery. Some jewels are worth a fortune." Poirot wagged a finger. "A robbery in a hall filled with witnesses? No, Inspector, that is absurd. No, the ring was not stolen for profit. It was taken for what it symbolized. Lord Vale wished to unveil a list, a charter of guardianship. Perhaps the ring was itself a key, either literally, as in some contrivance, or symbolically, as proof of authority." Before Graves could reply, the door opened, and Mrs. Larkins, the housekeeper, entered, accompanied by a porter carrying a tray of breakfast. She placed it upon a sideboard with her usual air of dignified control. "I took the liberty, gentlemen," she said. "You've had nothing since last night. Coffee and bread." Poirot thanked her warmly, then watched as she adjusted a vase on the mantel with unconscious neatness. "Madame Larkins," he asked gently, "you notice everything in this hall, do you not?" "I keep order, sir." "That is my duty. Then tell me, was Lord Vale wearing his ring when he entered the hall last night?" Her brow furrowed. "Yes, sir. I saw him glance at it as he spoke to the master. He was vain of it, always polishing it with his napkin." "And after his collapse?" She hesitated. I cannot say, sir. The moment was confusion. Poirot nodded. But you are certain he wore it when he entered? Certain. After she departed, Poirot turned to Graves. There, mon ami. The ring was taken after the death. That is of significance, Graves muttered again, but Poirot could see his mind beginning to turn. By mid-morning, the suspects were gathered once more in the senior common room. They looked weary, some resentful, others defiant. Poirot entered with the calm dignity of a professor beginning a lecture, and Graves followed, blunt as ever. "My friends," Poirot said, "you are impatient. You wish for this unpleasant matter to end. But patience, she is required. The truth hides itself among your words, your gestures, your contradictions. Allow me to clear some of the fog." He walked slowly before them, hands clasped behind his back. "Last night, each of you spoke of your feelings when Lord Vale gave his toast. Some of you admitted irritation, others confusion, some fear. But none spoke of sorrow. None." A rustle went through the group. Evelyn Vale dropped her gaze. Archer smirked. Lady Agatha folded her arms. Poirot's eyes sparkled. "That is most revealing, is it not? A man lies dead, and not one heart mourns. Each had cause to resent him, but resentment alone does not tell us who killed him. For that, we must ask, who benefited?" "Benefit," Archer snapped. "The man was insufferable, but his death hardly benefits me." "Ah, but does it not?" Poirot said smoothly. "No more lectures ridiculing your work. Your reputation may recover, now Vale is silent. And you, Dr. Hart, no more interference with your laboratories. Lady Agatha, your fellowship may proceed unhindered. Monsieur Crowe, no letters to expose you. Mademoiselle Evelyn, freedom from tyranny. Each of you, in some way, benefits." The silence thickened. Poirot let it hang before continuing. "But one detail sets our murderer apart. The ring." His eyes traveled slowly across them, pausing at each face. The signet ring, missing from Lord Vale's hand. Not a trinket, non. A symbol of lineage, authority, guardianship. Vale polished it constantly. He wished it noticed. Its removal, therefore, was not accident. It was deliberate. Phoebe Kent stirred uneasily. "What are you suggesting?" Poirot turned to her. "Perhaps you know, mademoiselle. You, the keeper of manuscripts, would understand that in the charter Vale intended to unveil such a ring bearing the family crest might serve as seal, as proof. To remove it is to prevent his revelation from having forced Dr. Kent's face flushed. But I—" She broke off, then clenched her hands. "I only wished more time to examine the manuscript. If Vale had spoken, he might have misrepresented its contents." Poirot's gaze softened. "Perhaps so. Yet the theft of the ring shows calculation. It was not rage alone. It was intellect married to intent." Graves stepped forward, his patience fraying. "Enough riddles, Poirot. Are you accusing her?" Poirot lifted a hand. "No, not yet. I accuse no one. I only observe. But mark this, Inspector. The murderer is one who understood both the poison and the significance of the ring. Knowledge and symbol, science and heritage. It is a curious combination." The suspects shifted uneasily again. Poirot caught the flicker of eyes, Hart glancing briefly at Kent, Kent at Crowe, Crowe at Evelyn. Each was measuring the others, weighing silence against survival. Poirot seated himself once more, folding his hands neatly. "The truth will come, mes amis. For now, I leave you with a question. Why must the murderer remove not only Lord Vale's life, but also his voice? Think on that." The company dispersed reluctantly, murmuring amongst themselves. Poirot remained by the hearth, watching the flames. Graves bent toward him. "You've stirred them, Poirot. They'll slip." "Someone always does." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "We, my friend. Already they begin to reveal themselves. It is only a matter of listening to the words spoken and, more importantly, those left unsaid. Outside, the ivy clung tight to the tower, unmoved by wind or rain. Within, the truth clung no less fiercely, waiting for Poirot's little grey cells to prize it free. The storm had abated by the second morning, leaving the air curiously still. The quadrangle of Ivy Tower College glistened under a pale sun. Puddles reflected the sharp angles of spires and chimneys, while the soaked ivy seemed darker, almost black, against the ancient stone. Yet inside the college walls, no freshness accompanied this new day. The atmosphere was thick with fatigue, suspicion, and the kind of tension that turns every glance into a question. Poirot rose early, immaculate as ever, and walked with measured tread through the cloisters. His little black shoes clicked sharply on the stones, as though even sound must obey his sense of order. He paused more than once, peering into corners, observing the damp footprints left by the porters, the careless scattering of wet umbrellas. Every detail mattered. To Poirot, her disorder was always a clue. In the senior common room, Inspector Graves sat at the table with a cup of strong tea and a pile of statements before him. He looked up as Poirot entered. "I've read through them again, Poirot. They all tell the same tale. No one touched Vale's glass, no one saw the ring taken, and every one of them insists they're innocent." Poirot smiled gently. "Ah, but you see, mon ami, that is exactly the problem. Their statements are too consistent. In truth, when 12 people witness a moment of chaos, they will not tell the same story. There are always small differences, n'est-ce pas? Yet here, every account is smoothed, as if polished like the silver on the high table. Too neat, too careful. It is in such tidiness that I smell," the lie Graves grunted. "So you're saying one of them tidied up their story?" "Which one?" Poirot settled himself, smoothing his cuff with exquisite attention. "That we must discover. But already I sense the murderer reveals himself, or herself, by the very perfection of their account. We must unsettle this perfection. To catch a liar, one must apply pressure." As if on cue, the master, Dr. Finch, entered with nervous haste. "Monsieur Poirot, Inspector, might I speak with you?" "Something has occurred." He handed Poirot a folded paper, his fingers trembling slightly. Poirot opened it with delicate precision. The note was brief, written in hurried script. "Seek not the ring, for it guards what should remain hidden. Let the dead keep their silence." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "Ah, so the murderer grows bold. He warns us away. But this, my friend, is good news. It tells us that we approach the heart of the matter." Graves muttered darkly. "Or it tells us he'll strike again." Poirot tapped the note thoughtfully. "Perhaps both. But observe, Inspector, the phrasing. Let the dead keep their silence. This is not the voice of panic. It is the voice of one who believes himself intellectual, even poetic. Vanity again, you see." They summoned the suspects once more to the senior common room. The atmosphere was electric. The note had already become known, carried through the college corridors by whispers that flitted faster than the pigeons. Each face bore signs of strain, Archer's arrogance sharpened to defiance, Hart's composure taut as glass, Lady Agatha's disdain colder than ever, Evelyn pale but resolute, Crow restless, Kent distracted, Pritchard sombre, Flint defensive. Poirot stood, holding the note delicately between two fingers. "My friends," he began, "this was left for us. A warning, a threat, perhaps a plea. Who among you has written it?" No one spoke. Poirot's gaze traveled slowly from one to another. "You see? Silence again. It is very telling. But I do not need confession, for the words themselves betray the writer. The phrasing is educated, the tone lofty. This is not the language of a servant. It is the language of scholarship, which means any of us, Archer said dryly. Non, Poirot replied, his moustaches twitching. Not any. Some write with precision, others with elegance, still others with haste. But only one here writes with the vanity of poetry while cloaking himself in secrecy. He let the words sink in, though he did not, yet reveal whom he suspected. Poirot was not ready. The psychological game had begun, and he would play it carefully. Instead, he turned to a new line of inquiry. Let us speak again of the ring. We know Lord Vale wore it when he entered the hall. We know it was gone when he died. Why? Not for value, no. For symbolism, yes. But there is something more. A ring leaves an impression, does it not? On wax, on paper, even on linen. He gestured toward the table where the linen bore its faint oval mark. This, Inspector, is what I must see examined. Perhaps the impression is not random. Perhaps there are letters, a crest, faint but discernible. Graves ordered the cloth brought closer. Poirot bent over it, magnifying glass in hand, his eyes gleaming. Slowly, with the precision of a jeweler, he traced the smudge. Look, he said softly. Do you see? Here, the faint suggestion of letters. A V, perhaps, and here, the outline of a shield. But it is blurred, distorted. The ring was pressed hastily, then removed. Why press it at all? Graves demanded. Poirot leaned back. Exactly, Inspector. Why? Unless someone sought to test whether it might serve as a seal, to press it upon the linen as one might upon wax. But having tested it, the murderer took it. Voila! The room stirred with unease. Pritchard murmured a prayer under his breath. Lady Agatha looked faintly amused, as though Poirot's deductions were a parlour trick. Beatrice Hart frowned, calculating. Evelyn Vale's hands twisted in her lap, while Crow stared at the floor. Poirot's eyes glittered. So now we know, the ring was not stolen in passion. It was taken with purpose, and the purpose was connected to the charter Vale intended to unveil. Someone feared his words, his proof, his authority. Someone sought to silence him. Utterly, Phoebe Kent suddenly spoke, her voice trembling. But you must understand, Vale was reckless. If he had altered the guardianship of the manuscripts, it could have destroyed decades of scholarly work. The ring, if he used it as seal, might have given him authority he did not deserve. Poirot turned to her gently. So, you admit the significance of the ring, mademoiselle? You, more than any, understood what it meant. Kent flushed. I did. But understanding does not mean murder. No, of course not, Poirot agreed softly. But it shows us why one might kill. Not for hatred, not for money, but for guardianship. For the power to say what must be preserved and what may be sold. The Reverend Pritchard's voice rang out suddenly. Then it was sacrilege. To spill blood for the sake of manuscripts, it is wickedness beyond measure. Poirot inclined his head. Perhaps. Or perhaps it is human vanity, the desire to be master, to control not only books but people, their lives, their destinies. His gaze rested briefly on Evelyn, then on Crow. Neither met his eyes. Graves slammed his hand upon the table. Enough. I'll have handwriting samples from all of you. We'll see who wrote this note. But Poirot raised a hand. Patience, mon ami. Handwriting can be disguised. Psychology cannot. Watch them, Inspector. Already they betray themselves. The group was dismissed once more, though their murmurs followed them down the corridors like a trail of smoke. Poirot remained behind, thoughtful. Do you see, Inspector, he said at last, how the murderer plays a game of minds? He sends notes, he removes symbols, he arranges scenes. This is not a crime of desperation, it is a crime of theatre. Such a criminal will not be content with silence. He will act again, for he craves control. Graves rubbed his jaw. You mean we've not seen the last of him? Poirot's eyes gleamed. Precisely. And that, Inspector, is how we shall catch him. We need only provide the stage. He will perform the rest. The ivy outside clung tightly to the tower walls, each tendril holding with quiet strength. Within, Poirot knew, another tendril of truth clung just as fiercely, and soon, with the right pressure, it would loosen and reveal what lay hidden beneath. For the moment, however, he smoothed a fold in the tablecloth, straightened a chair, and said softly to himself, "Order, always order." And where order is broken, Hercule Poirot restores it. The investigation was far from over. Another act in the drama of Ivy Tower was about to begin. The college bells tolled 10 o'clock, their solemn clang rolling across the quadrangle and rattling in the damp autumn air. Students hurrying to lectures glanced nervously at the cloister windows, aware that something extraordinary, something sinister, was unfolding within their walls. Ivy Tower had become a prison of sorts. No one entered, no one left. And within that prison, suspicion clung as tightly as the ivy itself. In the senior common room, the suspects gathered once more, summoned by Inspector Graves. They arrived in small clusters, speaking little, glancing often at one another. The air was close, heavy with the scent of wood smoke and stale candle wax. Poirot stood at the mantel, hands folded behind his back, his moustaches gleaming like fine scimitars in the light. He looked, as always, entirely at ease, though his green-grey eyes missed nothing. Inspector Graves, less patient, thumped a sheaf of papers onto the table. "We've compared the handwriting samples," he announced. "None of them is a perfect match for the note." A ripple of tension moved through the group. Lady Agatha's lips curled faintly, as though to say, "Of course not." Beatrice Hart folded her arms. Lionel Archer gave a sardonic laugh. Graves scowled. "One of you tried to disguise it, that's plain. But it won't hold. We'll bring in experts from London if we must." Poirot raised a hand, silken in its authority. "Inspector, forgive, mais non. Handwriting alone will not give you the answer. It is the soul that writes, not the pen. The soul she cannot be disguised so easily." He stepped forward, regarding the assembly with serene precision. "You see, mes amis, we must look not only at what was written, but why. The note tells us, 'Seek not the ring, for it guards what should remain hidden. Let the dead keep their silence.' These words are not of panic. They are of guardianship, of secrecy, of preservation. And so the mind of the writer must be one obsessed with such matters." Phoebe Kent colored, eyes darting downward. Poirot's gaze lingered on her, but he said nothing more for the moment. Instead, he paced slowly. "But let us not hurry. In such cases, it is haste which betrays. We must first examine more closely the second mystery, the ring." He moved to the table where the stained cloth had been laid, the faint oval mark visible. Lord Vale's ring, symbol of authority, was taken. Not for wealth. None. If wealth were the motive, it would be sold, hidden, melted. But here it was taken to prevent him from sealing his charter, to silence his revelation. In that, Inspector, lies our key. "Then you think it was Kent?" Graves said bluntly, nodding toward the archivist. Phoebe started, protesting quickly. "No, I swear, I never touched him. Yes, I feared what he might say, what damage he might do, but murder? Never." Poirot lifted a finger. "Calm yourself, mademoiselle. I do not accuse, yet I only observe. To wish delay is human. To poison is another matter. The murderer is cunning, oui, but also reckless. And I ask myself, who among you is both?" Lionel Archer leaned forward, his voice dry as parchment. "You'll go round the room again, Poirot, each of us painted in suspicion, yet all you offer is philosophy. Where is your proof?" Poirot smiled faintly. "Ah, monsieur, you mistake me. Proof is the end of the journey. To arrive, one must first choose the correct path. Archer scoffed, but Poirot continued unruffled. It was then that Evelyn Vale spoke, her voice trembling. "Monsieur Poirot, may I say something? My uncle, he had been different these past weeks. Restless, almost afraid. He spoke often of betrayal." Her words drew immediate attention. "Betrayal by whom?" Graves barked. "I don't know," Evelyn whispered. "He never named them. But the night before the banquet, he told me, 'Evelyn, the tower itself is rotten. Tomorrow I shall cleanse it.'" A murmur ran through the room. Poirot's eyes sharpened. "Rotten," he said. "That is curious indeed. Perhaps not manuscripts only, but corruption also? Money, reputation, honor, any of these could be the decay." Marcus Flint, the bursar, stiffened. "Are you implying?" Poirot's gaze slid to him, mild as cream yet unyielding. "Implying? No. But perhaps the master or the bursar can tell us? Were the accounts of the college, how shall we say, entirely without blemish?" Flint flushed, his heavy face tightening. "The accounts are my concern, not yours, not Lord Vale's, and certainly not for discussion before outsiders." "Voilà," Poirot murmured. "Such secrecy again. Always secrecy. Is it not strange, Inspector, how much is hidden in this place where learning should make everything clear?" Graves grunted, suspicious, but uncertain where to aim his suspicion. Poirot moved now to the Reverend Pritchard. "And you, Monsieur le Curé, you opposed Vale over the choir stalls, did you not? You called his plan sacrilege. He mocked you, perhaps?" The clergyman's lips thinned. "I did what conscience demanded, but I did not poison him." Poirot nodded gently. "I believe you, monsieur. Yet conscience has often been the cloak for crime, and so I must keep you in mind also." The tension grew unbearable. Lady Agatha broke it with a laugh, sharp and cold. "Really, Monsieur Poirot, we could sit here till doomsday while you parade our supposed sins." Meanwhile, the killer grows smug. Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Ah, madame, but smugness, it betrays itself. Pride cannot remain silent. The murderer wishes us to admire his cleverness, even as he hides. That is why he left the note. That is why he staged the death in the hall before all. It was vanity, pure vanity." He paused deliberately, letting the silence expand, pressing on them like a weight. "And vanity, mes amis, is the flaw which always undoes the criminal." The group dispersed again under Graves' orders, but Poirot lingered by the fire. Graves joined him, lowering his voice. "So, do you know?" Poirot smiled slightly. "I begin to. Already the picture is forming, but one piece is missing, the precise manner of the poison." Graves frowned. "Couldn't it just be in the wine?" "None. Too obvious. Too many would have risked sharing the cup. No, the murderer required a method subtle, certain, and theatrical. The wax splash tells us the moment, but the means. It is still hidden." As if summoned, Dr. Beatrice Hart entered, a sheaf of papers in her hand. "Inspector Monsieur Poirot," she said evenly, "I've prepared an inventory of the chemicals stored in my laboratory. Nothing is missing. Nothing dangerous, at least." Poirot accepted the list with a little bow. "Merci, mademoiselle. Yet if something were missing, would you not be the first to conceal it? To admit otherwise is too perfect, is it not?" Her eyes narrowed. "Are you accusing me of lying?" "No, I'm accusing you of being precise. Too precise, and precision, when it is too neat, is itself suspicious." She bristled, but Poirot returned to his seat, satisfied. The seed of doubt had been planted in her mind, and her reactions would betray her more than words. As evening fell, Poirot requested one final act before they retired: that all suspects assemble once more in the dining hall, precisely as they had been seated at the banquet. Some protested, but Graves enforced the order. Thus they gathered, subdued and anxious, at the long table. The stains remained, dark and ugly upon the cloth. Poirot stood at Lord Vale's chair, his hands resting lightly upon its back. "Mes amis," he said softly, "look about you. This is the stage of the crime. Each of you sat where you sit now. Each of you raised a glass, and one among you, at that very instant, made the fatal gesture. I ask you now, look into your memory. Did you notice one hand that trembled, one gesture too swift, one shadow across the light? Think, for the murderer was not hidden in darkness. He was here, among you, revealed in plain sight. A hush fell. No one moved. Poirot's eyes swept across them, pausing fractionally on each face. You do not answer. Bien, then I will answer for you. Soon, very soon, I shall tell you which hand delivered death to Lord Vale. But until then, remember this. The murderer believes himself clever, but he has left a trail of disorder. And Hercule Poirot, he notices disorder always. The storm had passed, yet in the hall the air was thicker than thunder. Every suspect sat rigid, caught in Poirot's invisible net, and though no confession came, each knew in their heart that the little Belgian detective was closing in. For Poirot himself, the picture was nearly complete. Only one thread remained to be tugged, and when it came free, the entire tapestry would unravel, revealing the murderer of Ivy Tower at last. The dining hall of Ivy Tower, once the scene of celebration, now resembled a theatre suspended between acts. The candles flickered low in their sconces, the dark blot upon the linen stretched like a wound that refused to close, and the assembled company sat stiffly in their former places. They were no longer guests at a banquet. They were unwilling players in Poirot's reconstruction. Inspector Graves loomed at the door with two constables, his bulldog jaw set. The master, Dr. Finch, tried for dignity, though his hands fiddled unconsciously with his gown's tassels. Around the table, the suspects shifted in their chairs, faces pale with exhaustion and resentment. Poirot, at Lord Vale's vacant seat, smoothed the tablecloth with fingertips as though it were a map to be read. "Mes amis," he began, "when a crime is committed before many witnesses, the murderer believes himself shielded by numbers. No one will see me, he thinks, for there are too many eyes. But in truth everyone sees him. They simply do not understand what they have seen. That is why we return here." To look again, he tapped the goblet beside Vale's chair. Here lay the poison. The splash of wax tells us, in the moment of the toast, this glass was moved, not carelessly but with purpose. The murderer leaned in. He made his little gesture, and Lord Vale's fate was sealed. A rustle passed through the group. Beatrice Hart's lips pressed tight. Lionel Archer let out a sharp breath. Evelyn Vale clutched at her shawl. Poirot raised a hand. "Calm yourselves, I pray. We will not yet name the hand. Instead, let us examine again the why. For always in murder, it is motive that guides the hand, and motive that betrays." He paced slowly along the table, his patent leather shoes glinting. "Each of you had cause. Professor Archer, mocked in his scholarship. Dr. Hart, robbed of her funding. Lady Agatha, thwarted in her fellowship. Reverend Pritchard, angered at sacrilege. Dr. Kent, fearful for the manuscripts. Monsieur Crowe, threatened with ruin. Mademoiselle Evelyn, chained by control. Monsieur Flint, anxious for his accounts. We, each of you had reason to wish Lord Vale silent." He paused, letting their discomfort grow. But reason alone is not enough. To kill in public before witnesses, that requires not only hatred, but audacity. Who among you possesses such audacity? Archer gave a mirthless laugh. "Surely you'll point at me, Poirot." The loudest critic, the most theatrical tongue. Yet poison, that is cowardice, not audacity. "No," Poirot said softly. Poison may be cowardice in some hands, but in this case it was vanity. To strike at the moment of triumph, to silence Vale before his revelation, that is audacious theatre. And vanity, mes amis, is the truest clue of all. He turned then to Phoebe Kent. Mademoiselle, you spoke last night of the charter. You feared Lord Vale would misuse it. And you perhaps know best what role the ring played. Kent trembled, her voice breaking. Yes, the ring bore the Vale crest. With it, he might have sealed documents as though by ancestral right. If he had proclaimed guardianship of the manuscripts, none could have stopped him. The ring gave weight to his words. Just so, Poirot said gently. And so, when he fell, someone snatched the ring, lest he carry it into death with proof still upon him. You see, the theft of the ring was not afterthought. It was part of the plan. Lady Agatha scoffed. So we are all to blame, Monsieur Poirot. All of us guardians, all of us vain. You spin philosophy while a murderer sits among us. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Patience, madame. Philosophy, yes, but also deduction. Already I see the pattern. But permit me one more experiment. He directed the suspects to raise their glasses, filled now with harmless water. Imagine, mes amis, the moment of the toast. Vale speaks, to tradition, to truth, and to those who guard it. You lift your glasses. Some smile, some frown, some glance aside. And in that moment, one among you, seated here, he tapped the place cards with a delicate finger. One made a gesture so small, so natural, it escaped notice. A flick of the wrist, a lean of the shoulder, a brush of fingers. Such a gesture, no? He turned suddenly to Beatrice Hart. Mademoiselle, you understand alkaloids, yes? You know which would act swiftly, silently. Who else at this table possesses that knowledge? Hart's eyes narrowed. No one. But that does not make me guilty. No, it does not, Poirot agreed. But it means the murderer relied not on chance, but on science. He or she knew exactly what would happen, Graves growled. So, who was it? Poirot held up a hand. Almost, Inspector. But not yet, for there is still the matter of the note. Seek not the ring. Let the dead keep their silence. This is not written by one who fears discovery. It is written by one who wishes to rule, to command even after the deed. It is arrogance, pure and simple. He looked at the assembled faces. And arrogance, mes amis, is harder to disguise than handwriting. It shines through every word, every glance. Even now, as we sit here, the murderer believes himself clever, but he has already betrayed himself, in his haste, in his pride. The hall fell into a tense silence. Evelyn's breath came quick. Crow clenched his jaw. Archer's eyes glittered with challenge. Hart stared coldly. Lady Agatha drummed her fingers on the table. Flint shifted uneasily. Pritchard muttered a prayer. Poirot spread his hands. You see, the picture is almost complete. The ring, the poison, the note. They are three threads of the same tapestry. Soon, mes amis, I will gather you again and tell you whose hand committed this crime. But for now, remember, the murderer is among you still, and he cannot resist his own vanity. That vanity will undo him. Inspector Graves dismissed them, though none left easily. They filed out in silence, each suspect trapped in his or her own shadow. Poirot lingered behind, alone with the empty chair of Lord Vale. He placed his hand lightly upon the stained cloth, his eyes bright with thought. The little grey cells, he murmured. They arrange themselves. And soon the picture is clear. But first, I must play the game a little longer. The murderer is bold. Let us see how bold he will become when the net tightens. The ivy on the tower rustled faintly in the evening breeze, as if in agreement. Within, Poirot prepared for the next act of his psychological duel. The Ivy Tower mystery was nearing its climax, and the murderer, though still cloaked in silence, was already caught in the geometry of Poirot's order. The trap was nearly ready. All that remained was to spring it. The night fell once more over Ivy Tower. Calm this time, the storm spent and leaving only a pale half-moon peering through tatters of cloud. The silence was almost oppressive after the days of thunder and rain, as if the very air were waiting for something to happen. Within the senior common room, a fire burned low, its embers glowing like watchful eyes. Poirot sat by it, polished shoes together, fingertips pressed, the very image of contemplation. Inspector Graves paced, impatient, his heavy steps echoing. "I tell you, Poirot, this won't do. We're sitting on our hands while the murderer smirks at us. Half the dons are whispering rebellion, the servants are restless, and the townsfolk are demanding answers. If you have something, man, say it." Poirot lifted his brows, serene. "Mon cher inspecteur, to reveal the truth too soon is like plucking the pear before it is ripe. It bruises, it spoils. No, we must let it ripen, then the harvest will be sweet." Graves groaned. "You and your fruit metaphors? Meanwhile, I have 8 suspects under lock and key." 7, Poirot corrected softly. "Do not forget Mrs. Larkins. Though she is not of the high table, her eyes see more than most. She, too, must be considered." Graves stopped. "You think the housekeeper—" Poirot raised a hand. "I think nothing yet. I only observe. But tonight, mon ami, I shall force the murderer to reveal himself, for already he grows reckless. Did he not leave us a note? Did he not remove the ring, daring us to seek it? Vanity, Inspector, vanity. And vanity always overreaches." As if to prove Poirot's words, a knock came at the door. A porter entered, pale, clutching something wrapped in cloth. "Beg pardon, sirs." This was found in the courtyard. In the ivy, Graves seized it, unwrapping to reveal a small object glinting in the firelight. Lord Vale's missing signet ring. A murmur of triumph escaped Graves. "We've got it! Someone tried to hide it, but we'll test it for prints." "Non," Poirot interrupted sharply. "The murderer wishes us to find it. He hides nothing in ivy by accident. It is a message." Graves blinked. "A message?" Poirot held up the ring, turning it so the firelight caught the engraved crest. See, Inspector. A circle complete, a seal unbroken. The murderer says, I am still the guardian. I decide what is hidden and what is revealed. He plays with us, like a cat with a mouse. But the game, it turns." Now Graves swore under his breath. "So what do we do?" Poirot's mustaches gleamed as he smiled. "We set the final stage. Tomorrow, we assemble them all. The murderer expects his cleverness to go unchallenged. Instead, we shall expose him before every eye." The following morning dawned pale and cold. Mist coiled around the college spires like ghostly fingers. The summons went out, and by noon the suspects were gathered once more in the dining hall. The stain upon the linen seemed darker still, a reminder none could ignore. At the high table, Poirot stood, small and impeccable, his green-grey eyes glinting with contained energy. Inspector Graves loomed beside him, arms folded. "Mes amis," Poirot began, his voice carrying effortlessly, "the time has come. For days we have danced in circles. Motive here, opportunity there, suspicion everywhere. But always there is one thing that restores order. The truth. And now you shall hear it." The company stirred uneasily. Sir Evelyn Vale clutched Sebastian's hand beneath the table. Lady Agatha sat with icy poise. Hart's expression was that of a scientist facing an experiment whose results she dreaded. Archer lounged insolently, though his eyes betrayed nerves. Pritchard muttered a prayer. Flint dabbed his brow. Phoebe Kent twisted her fingers in her lap. Poirot spread his hands. "First, let us recall the elements of our mystery. A man dies at his banquet. Swift, silent poison. At the moment of the toast, his glass is moved. Wax is splattered. The ring vanishes. Later, a note warns us to seek not the ring, for it guards what should remain hidden. Then, the ring itself reappears, placed in the ivy for us to find. Voila! A trail most deliberate. He moves slowly before them. Now, let us eliminate. Professor Archer, your vanity is great, but your method is not poison. You prefer the duel of wit, not the silent drop. Lady Agatha, your weapon is influence, not chemistry. Reverend Pritchard, you are rigid, but not reckless. Marcus Flint, you conceal accounts perhaps, but murder. None, that is disorder, and you fear exposure too greatly. Flint opened his mouth, but Poirot silenced him with a glance. Sebastian Crow, you are passionate, foolish perhaps, but poison requires patience, not fire. Eveline, ma pauvre enfant, you wished for freedom, but you lacked the cruelty for such a deed. Eveline bowed her head, tears glistening. Poirot's eyes hardened. Which leaves us two, Dr. Hart, mistress of alkaloids, and Dr. Kent, guardian of manuscripts. One possesses the knowledge, the other the motive. And the crime, mes amis, required both a ripple of shock pass through the room. Kent gasped. Hart's composure wavered. Yes, Poirot cried, his voice ringing. This was a crime of collaboration, or rather, of knowledge stolen. For the murderer required both the poisoner's art and the archivist's obsession. And who better than Dr. Hart, who knew which alkaloid to use, who could introduce it with perfect subtlety during the toast, and yet, why would she trouble herself with the ring, with the guardianship? None. She cares for science, not for symbols. Hart straightened, relief flickering in her eyes. Then it was Kent. No, madame, Poirot cut her off. Dr. Kent feared Vale's revelations. Yes, but she did not know how to kill. She trembled at the thought. No, the true murderer is the one who combined both elements, who had knowledge of poisons and also understood the power of the ring, who was vain enough to stage a death before witnesses and arrogant enough to leave us notes. He turned suddenly, his eyes blazing and pointed. Professor Lionel Archer. The room gasped. Archer sat frozen, his sardonic mask slipping. Poirot advanced, every word precise. Oui, monsieur, it is you the classicist, whose pride was wounded by Vale's ridicule. You who fancied yourself a poet, who wrote the note in lofty tones. You who studied not only texts but ancient remedies, poisons catalogued in Latin manuscripts. Do not protest. You lectured last term on Mithridates and his poisons. You knew exactly which alkaloid would mimic a sudden heart failure, and you sat close enough to lean, to brush the glass at the moment of the toast. The wax, the splash, they betray your clumsiness. Archer's lips twisted. This is absurd. You have no proof. Poirot's voice grew softer, deadly calm. Ah, but I have. The ring, monsieur, it was you who pressed it into the cloth, to test its impression, before snatching it away, and it was you who returned it to the ivy, taunting us. For who else would delight in such classical theatre? You wished to show yourself cleverer than Vale, cleverer than all, but vanity, it betrayed you. Archer half rose, his face pale, then dropped back, laughter harsh. Very clever, Poirot. But why should I return the ring at all? Poirot's eyes gleamed, because you could not resist. You wished us to marvel at your performance. The note, the ivy, the ring, they were your applause, monsieur. And now I give you your curtain call. Inspector Graves stepped forward, heavy hand upon Archer's shoulder. Lionel Archer, I arrest you for the murder of Lord Vale. A stunned silence fell. Eveline sobbed softly. Sebastian whispered comfort. Lady Agatha allowed herself a grim smile. Hart exhaled as though freed. Kent buried her face in her hands. Poirot, smoothing his moustache, addressed them one final time. "You see, mes amis, it is always vanity. Pride, she is the undoing of man." Archer thought himself actor, poet, scholar, and murderer all in one. But he forgot. There's always one in the audience who sees the flaw in the performance. Hercule Poirot, he sees the ivy rustled outside as if applauding. And in the silent hall of Ivy Tower, justice had at last spoken, yet Poirot's eyes remained grave. A man is dead and another disgraced. But remember this: knowledge without humility is poison also. It corrodes the soul. And that, mes amis, is the greatest tragedy of all. He adjusted a candlestick, straightened a chair, and with perfect composure declared the matter ended. The final gathering had dispersed, but the echo of it lingered in the stones of Ivy Tower. The great hall stood empty at last, save for the shadows of the portraits and the heavy hush that follows confession. Inspector Graves had taken Lionel Archer away, the clatter of his boots and the constable's measured tread fading into the distance. Order, in its crude way, had been restored. Yet Poirot lingered, moving with his usual care among the tables, straightening a chair here, adjusting a silver spoon there. Dr. Finch approached, his face drawn, his voice low. "Monsieur Poirot, I can scarcely believe it. Archer, our brightest wit, our most celebrated scholar, to think him guilty of murder." Poirot inclined his head gravely. "It shocks, yes. But it should not surprise. Vanity, my dear doctor, she wears many disguises. For some it is ambition. For Archer it was the need to prove himself cleverer than his enemy, cleverer than all. And vanity, she is always betrayed by her own flourish." Lady Agatha, still present, gave a short, cold laugh. "Clever indeed. He thought himself an ancient tragedian, but this stage has seen the end of his performance." She gathered her cloak about her and swept out without further word. The others had already gone, Hart to her laboratory, Flint to his ledgers, Pritchard to his chapel, Kent to her manuscripts, Evelyn clinging to Sebastian's arm. The hall was silent now, save for the faint creak of beams in the roof and the sigh of wind through the ivy. Graves returned, rubbing his jaw. "He's confessed enough, Poirot. Not in words, but in his manner. When I pressed him on the poison, he crumbled. He'd studied those old remedies, just as you said. He couldn't resist telling me which one he chose, as though it were an achievement." Poirot's moustaches twitched. Of course. Pride demands recognition, even when the gallows wait. He wished to be admired. Even in guilt, Graves gave a grunt. "Well, it's done. The papers will have their headlines. Oxford will recover, and I'll sleep for the first time in days." Poirot smiled faintly. "Sleep, Inspector, is indeed the reward of order restored." They walked together to the cloister. The night was clear, stars scattered across the dark like powdered diamonds. The ivy clung tightly to the tower walls, glistening faintly in the moonlight. Poirot paused, gazing upward. "See, Inspector, how the ivy grows. She climbs, she strangles, she hides the stone beneath. Yet pull her away, and the tower remains, old, scarred, but enduring. So it is with truth. Conceal her as one will, she endures beneath the disguise. One has only to peel away the vanity, the lies, to reveal her again." Graves studied him a moment, then chuckled softly. "You're a poet yourself, Poirot." "No," Poirot replied with a small bow. "I am only a gardener of order. I prune, I tend, I clear away the weeds of deceit. And then, mon ami, truth blooms of herself." They parted, Graves to his duties, Poirot to his quiet lodgings in town. Yet as he left the Ivy Tower behind, Poirot allowed himself one final reflection. A man had died, unloved for his arrogance. Another had killed, undone by his vanity, and those who remained would return to their books, their ledgers, their laboratories, each chastened in some measure by what had passed. But Poirot knew the lesson would fade. Human nature, it did not change. The jealousies, the rivalries, the little vanities, they would sprout anew, like ivy creeping back upon the stone. He touched the brim of his hat, his moustaches immaculate, and murmured into the night, "Such is the tragedy and the comedy of humankind. Toujours, toujours the same. But Hercule Poirot, he is here to set the order right." And with that, he walked away beneath the stars, the case of murder in the ivy tower closed, and the ivy once more left to whisper against the ancient stones